The testing chamber hummed with nervous energy as 50 human students took their seats alongside creatures from 12 different worlds. Luna Station's examination hall had been specially modified for this historic event with atmospheric controls, adjusted to accommodate species that breathed methane, silicon dust, and pure electromagnetic radiation. Professor Thane Williams watched from the observation deck as his students prepared for what the Galactic Education Consortium called the most comprehensive intelligence assessment in known space. The Altarians had designed this test over 3,000 years ago, refining it through countless iterations across hundreds of species. These crystalline beings, standing nearly 8 feet tall with bodies that sang in harmonic frequencies, were considered the galaxy's premier educators. Their lead examiner, Dr. Keth, resonated a low, welcoming tone as he began the assessment. Protocols. Tom Bradley nervously adjusted his tablet interface while glancing at the Corran student beside him. The reptilian creature's scaled hands moved with mechanical precision across its testing device, already deep into the preliminary mathematics section. On Tom's other side, a gaseous nebulon flickered between purple and gold hues, its electromagnetic field pulsing in rhythmic patterns that indicated intense concentration. The test began simply enough. Basic mathematical concepts that any spacefaring species should master appeared on the screens. Addition, subtraction, geometric principles, and algebraic equations flowed past in steady succession. The human students performed well, though not exceptionally. The Corrans dominated this section with their natural affinity for numerical precision, while the cybernetic terminus species processed calculations at superhuman speeds. Maria Santos found herself struggling slightly with the spatial reasoning problems that came next. Three-dimensional rotations and geometric transformations challenged her visual processing abilities, especially when competing against species that perceived reality in multiple dimensions simultaneously. The insectoid hive minds shared collective processing power, solving complex spatial puzzles in seconds through distributed cognition. As the examination progressed into pattern recognition, the human students began to show their unique approaches. Where other species followed logical progressions through established sequences, humans often jumped to conclusions through intuitive leaps that their alien counterparts found confusing. David Kim identified a recurring mathematical pattern by recognizing its similarity to musical harmonies he had studied, an approach that baffled the purely logical terminus delegates. The Altarian proctors exchanged harmonic frequencies among themselves, noting the human's tendency to draw connections between seemingly unrelated concepts. This behavior appeared inefficient compared to the direct analytical approaches of other species, yet the humans consistently arrived at correct answers through these circuitous mental pathways. Everything changed when the theoretical physics section began. The testing interface shifted to present scenarios that pushed the boundaries of known science. Students faced questions about faster-than-light travel, temporal mechanics, and dimensional manipulation. These problems were designed not to have correct answers, but to test how different species responded to absolute impossibilities. The expected pattern emerged quickly among the alien students. The Corrans provided mathematically precise analyses that concluded with statements about physical impossibilities. The Nebulans offered elegant proofs explaining why certain theoretical scenarios violated fundamental laws of reality. The Terminus species generated detailed logical frameworks that systematically eliminated all possible solutions, arriving at clean negative conclusions. But the humans did something unprecedented. Instead of accepting the impossibilities, they began questioning the problems themselves. Tom Bradley stared at a scenario involving energy requirements for dimensional folding and started sketching alternative approaches in the margins of his interface. Rather than calculating why the problem was unsolvable, he began designing theoretical frameworks that might make it solvable. Maria Santos encountered a question about creating stable wormholes with insufficient energy sources. Instead of proving the impossibility, she began writing about treating space-time as a renewable resource rather than a fixed constraint. Her mathematics were unconventional, based on principles that didn't appear in any standard physics textbooks. Yet they followed internal logical consistency. David Kim faced the most complex scenario of all, a problem involving faster-than-light communication through quantum entanglement across galactic distances. The question was designed to test understanding of quantum mechanics limitations. Instead of demonstrating why such communication was impossible, David wrote a detailed analysis explaining why the question itself was fundamentally flawed. He argued that the test designers had imposed artificial constraints based on incomplete understanding of quantum consciousness interactions. Dr. Keth's crystalline form began resonating in confused harmonic patterns as he reviewed the human responses in real time. These students weren't following established cognitive protocols. They were treating impossible scenarios as design challenges rather than theoretical exercises. More disturbing still, their unconventional approaches weren't entirely wrong. From a mathematical perspective, Luke Morgan approached a problem about instantaneous matter transmission across interstellar distances. The scenario was specifically crafted to be impossible due to energy conservation laws and information transfer limitations. Luke's response ignored these constraints entirely, proposing a system that treated matter as temporarily borrowed from parallel dimensional states rather than permanently relocated. His framework suggested that transmission didn't require moving matter at all, just exchanging it with identical matter from adjacent realities. The other human students displayed similar patterns. Nina Patel redesigned terraforming equations by treating planetary atmospheres as living systems rather than chemical mixtures. Alex Rivera solved gravitational manipulation problems by proposing that gravity could be convinced rather than forced. Each response demonstrated the same fundamental approach, questioning the assumptions that made problems impossible rather than accepting those assumptions as immutable facts. Professor Williams noticed the growing agitation among the Altarian proctors. Their harmonic communications increased in frequency and complexity, clearly indicating distress or confusion. The examination protocols had never encountered this type of cognitive response pattern. The humans weren't failing the impossible problems. They were rejecting the concept of impossibility itself. As the assessment concluded, Dr. Keth approached Professor Williams with visible bewilderment. The crystalline being's harmonic voice carried undertones of genuine confusion as he explained that the human responses would require extensive analysis. Never in 3 millennia of testing had any species attempted to solve problems that were specifically designed to be unsolvable. The human students filed out of the examination chamber, discussing their answers with typical post-test anxiety. They had no idea that their responses had just challenged the fundamental assumptions of galactic education theory. Their casual dismissal of impossibility as merely another problem-solving parameter would soon reshape how the galaxy's greatest minds understood the nature of intelligence itself, the universal. Cognitive assessment had intended to measure how humans fit within established galactic intelligence frameworks. Instead, it had revealed that humans operated according to entirely different cognitive principles that treated the word impossible as a starting point for innovation rather than a final conclusion. 3 days after the assessment, Dr. Keth found himself in the most perplexing situation of his 3-century career as an educator. The Altarian analysis chambers buzzed with harmonic frequencies of confusion as teams of his most brilliant colleagues reviewed the human test responses. Each examination only deepened the mystery surrounding these strange bipedal creatures from the third planet of an unremarkable star system. The mathematical review team had spent 18 hours analyzing Tom Bradley's approach to the dimensional folding problem. His solution proposed using quantum entanglement cascades to bypass energy requirements entirely, treating the energy barrier not as an obstacle to overcome but as a design flaw in the original approach. The mathematics weren't conventional, but they weren't wrong either. More troubling, they suggested possibilities that Altarian science had never considered. Tom's framework treated dimensional space as having natural fold points that could be activated with minimal energy input, similar to how origami paper had predetermined crease lines. His calculations indicated that massive energy requirements existed only because previous theoretical approaches had attempted to force dimensional folds at arbitrary points rather than identifying where spacetime naturally wanted to bend. Maria Santos's response to the stable wormhole problem had generated even more bewilderment among the physics analysis team. She had completely reimagined the fundamental nature of spacetime, treating it as a renewable resource that could be borrowed, manipulated, and returned without permanent alteration. Her solution involved creating temporary spacetime loans from parallel dimensional states, using the energy differential between realities to maintain wormhole stability. The concept was so foreign to established physics that the Altarian computers initially rejected her mathematical framework as computational error. Only after manual verification did the analysis team confirm that Maria's equations were internally consistent and theoretically sound, despite being based on principles that didn't exist in galactic scientific literature. David Kim's response had created the greatest controversy of all. His detailed critique of the faster-than-light communication problem had essentially accused the test designers of intellectual limitations. He argued that the scenario's impossibility existed only because the question assumed communication required information transfer, when consciousness-based quantum interaction might allow instantaneous awareness sharing without moving any information at all. Dr. Keth reviewed David's analysis for the 7th time, his crystalline matrix resonating with frustrated harmonics. The human student had identified 12 specific assumptions underlying the problem design, then systematically demonstrated how each assumption was culturally biased rather than scientifically necessary. His alternative framework treated consciousness as a quantum field that could establish direct connections across any distance without violating information transfer limitations. The pattern emerging from all human responses was unprecedented in galactic testing history. Every other species approached impossible problems by accepting the impossibility and then demonstrating their understanding of why the scenario couldn't work. Humans seemed incapable of accepting impossibility as a starting premise. Instead, they treated impossible scenarios as incomplete problem definitions that required creative reframing. Luke Morgan's matter transmission solution had particularly disturbed the terminus analysis team. His proposal for borrowing matter from parallel dimensions rather than transmitting it through normal spacetime challenged their fundamental understanding of reality structure. The cybernetic species prided themselves on logical precision. Yet Luke's framework was logically consistent, while being completely illogical according to established physics principles. Nina Patel's terraforming approach had confused the biological assessment team by treating planetary atmospheres as living entities capable of negotiation rather than chemical systems requiring manipulation. Her solution involved establishing symbiotic relationships with atmospheric components, convincing gases to reorganize themselves rather than forcing chemical changes through energy expenditure. Alex Rivera's gravitational manipulation framework had proposed that gravity could be influenced through harmonic resonance rather than energy application. His mathematics suggested that gravitational fields had natural frequencies that could be synchronized with artificial harmonic generators, allowing massive objects to be moved through convincing rather than forcing. Dr. Keth convened an emergency session with the Galactic Education Council to present these findings. The assembled representatives from 12 species listened in growing disbelief as he explained the human responses. Ambassador Quinn of the Zephyrians was the first to voice skepticism, his gaseous form shifting to deep red hues of incredulity. The Terminus delegate suggested that human neural architecture might be fundamentally defective, causing them to ignore logical constraints that other species recognized instinctively. Perhaps humans were cognitively incapable of understanding impossibility, making their responses interesting curiosities rather than genuine solutions. The Koran representative proposed that humans might be engaging in elaborate fantasy rather than scientific reasoning. Their responses could be creative fiction rather than legitimate theoretical frameworks, explaining why they seemed so disconnected from established scientific principles. But Professor Williams had been conducting his own analysis of the human responses, and he had noticed something that the alien observers had missed. The human solutions weren't random creative exercises. They followed consistent methodological patterns that suggested systematic rather than chaotic thinking. Every human response had begun by questioning the fundamental assumptions underlying the problem. They then reconstructed the scenario using alternative conceptual frameworks that eliminated the original impossibility conditions. Finally, they developed practical implementation strategies based on their reconstructed understanding. This approach was so foreign to galactic thinking that other species had dismissed it as cognitive malfunction. But Professor Williams recognized it as a sophisticated, problem-solving methodology that treated impossibility as a symptom of incomplete problem understanding rather than an absolute constraint. The implications were staggering. If humans were correct, then thousands of years of galactic scientific progress had been limited by species-specific, cognitive boundaries rather than actual physical laws. Problems that had been classified as impossible might simply require cognitive approaches that no galactic species had developed. Dr. Keth's harmonic resonance shifted to frequencies indicating deep contemplation as he processed these possibilities. The universal cognitive assessment had been designed to measure how well different species understood established reality. Instead, it had revealed that humans might understand reality differently enough to transcend limitations that other species accepted as absolute. The question facing the Galactic Education Council was no longer whether human responses were correct or incorrect. The question was whether reality itself might be more malleable than galactic science had ever imagined, and whether humans possessed cognitive tools for reshaping impossibilities that other species had never developed. As the council session concluded, reports began arriving from human colonies across the galaxy. Students who had taken the assessment were applying their unconventional problem-solving approaches to real-world challenges, with results that defied everything the galaxy thought it knew about the boundaries between possible and impossible. Reports flooded into the Galactic Education Council from across human space as something unprecedented began happening. Students who had participated in the Universal Cognitive Assessment were applying their unconventional thinking to real problems, generating solutions that established galactic science insisted should be impossible. The first breakthrough occurred on Mars, where the colonial authority had been struggling with terraforming limitations for over 2 decades. The project required atmospheric processors that consumed more energy than the entire colony could generate, creating an unsolvable resource allocation problem that had stumped the galaxy's best engineering minds. Alex Rivera, fresh from his assessment experience, approached the problem with typical human disregard for established limitations. Instead of accepting the energy requirements as fixed parameters, he began questioning why atmospheric processing needed to consume energy at all. His revolutionary design treated Mars's existing magnetic field not as an obstacle to overcome, but as a renewable energy source to be harmonized with Alex's atmospheric processors, worked by synchronizing with the planet's natural electromagnetic rhythms, using magnetic field fluctuations to power the chemical reactions that would normally require massive energy input. The processors became self-sustaining within weeks, generating more atmospheric change in months than previous systems had achieved in years. The colonial authorities' engineering team initially rejected Alex's proposals as impossible, but their skepticism evaporated when his prototype processors began exceeding all performance projections. The young human had solved a problem that Coran mathematicians and terminus computers had proven unsolvable, simply by refusing to accept their proof of impossibility. On Europa, the Xenobiology Research Station faced a different impossibility. Nina Patel had been assigned to study life forms in the Moon's subsurface ocean, but established biological principles indicated that complex life couldn't exist in Europa's extreme conditions. The water was too cold, the pressure too intense, and the chemical composition too hostile for any known biological processes. Nina applied the same assumption-questioning approach she had used during the assessment. Instead of accepting that life couldn't exist in Europa's ocean, she began exploring why established biological principles might be incomplete. Her research framework treated life not as a chemical process that required specific conditions, but as an information pattern that could adapt to any available medium. Her breakthrough came when she discovered microorganisms that existed in quantum superposition states, switching between multiple biological configurations based on environmental pressures. These life forms weren't fighting Europa's hostile conditions. They were using those conditions as structural elements in their biological architecture. Nina's findings contradicted 2 centuries of Koran biological research that had mathematically proven such life forms were impossible. Yet her specimens thrived in laboratory conditions, reproducing and evolving in ways that redefined the boundaries of what the galaxy considered alive. The most dramatic example emerged from the asteroid mining operations near Ceres, where resource allocation had become a logistical nightmare. The mining consortium faced a problem that had defeated the galaxy's most sophisticated AI systems for decades. Supply chains couldn't be optimized because resource demands changed faster than transportation could adapt, creating cascading inefficiencies that made profitable mining impossible. Luke Morgan approached this challenge with the same creative reframing he had applied to theoretical matter transmission during his assessment. Instead of accepting time as a linear constraint that limited resource distribution, he began exploring temporal mechanics as a manipulable resource dimension. Luke's solution involved creating controlled temporal loops within the mining operation, allowing resources to be harvested, processed, and distributed across multiple time streams simultaneously. Mining equipment could extract materials in one temporal frame, while those same materials were being processed in a parallel time stream, effectively multiplying the operation's productive capacity without requiring additional physical resources. The concept was so foreign to established physics that the mining consortium's Terminus computers initially crashed when attempting to process Luke's temporal logistics algorithms. But field testing proved that his system worked, increasing mining efficiency by factors that shouldn't have been possible according to galactic understanding of time mechanics. Dr. Keth arrived on Earth personally to investigate these developments, his crystalline form resonating with frequencies of profound confusion. The Altarian scientist had spent his entire career studying cognitive development across galactic species, but nothing in his experience had prepared him for what humans were achieving. His investigation began at the Mars colony, where he observed Alex Rivera's atmospheric processors operating in apparent violation of energy conservation laws. The machines consumed minimal input energy while generating massive atmospheric changes, using magnetic field harmonics in ways that Altarian physics couldn't explain. Alex demonstrated his design philosophy by sketching modifications that could terraform Venus by convincing its atmospheric components to reorganize themselves voluntarily. He treated planetary atmospheres not as chaotic chemical systems requiring force to control, but as complex entities capable of cooperation given proper communication approaches. On Europa, Dr. Keth studied Nina Patel's quantum superposition organisms. With growing bewilderment, these life forms existed in states that Koran biology had proven impossible. Yet they thrived under laboratory conditions that should have been instantly lethal. Nina explained her discovery process with casual confidence that ignored centuries of established biological limitations. The Ceres mining operation provided the most dramatic evidence of human cognitive uniqueness. Dr. Keth observed Luke Morgan's temporal logistics system processing resources across multiple time streams simultaneously, achieving productivity levels that violated basic assumptions about linear time progression. Luke's explanation of his system treated time as just another resource dimension that could be optimized like space or energy. His mathematical frameworks described temporal mechanics with the same casual confidence that other species reserved for simple addition problems. Dr. Keth realized that all these breakthroughs followed the same pattern he had observed during the assessment. Humans approached impossible problems by questioning the assumptions that made them impossible, then reconstructing their understanding of reality to eliminate those limitations. This wasn't ignorance or cognitive defect, as some council members had suggested. It was a sophisticated problem-solving. methodology that treated impossibility as incomplete problem definition rather than absolute constraint. Humans possessed cognitive flexibility that allowed them to reshape their understanding of reality. When necessary to achieve desired outcomes, the implications terrified and excited the galactic scientific community. If humans were correct about the malleable nature of impossibility, then thousands of years of galactic progress had been constrained by species-specific cognitive limitations rather than actual physical laws, problems that had shaped galactic civilization's development, challenges that had defined the boundaries of what advanced species could achieve, might simply require cognitive approaches that no galactic race had developed until humanity joined the community. As Dr. Keth prepared his report for the Galactic Education Council, more breakthrough reports continued arriving from human colonies. Students were solving impossible problems with increasing frequency and confidence, treating limitations that had constrained galactic development for millennia as mere starting points for creative thinking. The pattern was clear and undeniable. Humans had evolved cognitive capabilities that other galactic species lacked, capabilities that allowed them to transcend impossibilities by reconstructing the conceptual frameworks that created those impossibilities in the first place. Dr. Rachel Foster had never expected her neuroscience research to become the key to understanding galactic intelligence theory. The human scientist worked in a cramped laboratory beneath New Geneva's medical complex, studying brain patterns in students who had participated in the Universal Cognitive Assessment. Her collaboration with Dr. Keth had begun as academic curiosity, but had evolved into something that would reshape the galaxy's understanding of consciousness itself. The breakthrough came when they analyzed neural scan data from Tom Bradley during his response to the dimensional folding problem. While most species' brain patterns showed predictable termination points when encountering impossible scenarios, Tom's neural pathways exhibited unprecedented behavior. Instead of stopping at cognitive dead ends, his brain began forming entirely new connections between previously unrelated knowledge domains. Dr. Foster watched the scan replay with growing excitement as Tom's mind processed the impossible scenario. His neural pathways initially followed conventional physics reasoning, arriving at the expected impossibility conclusion. But then something remarkable happened. Instead of accepting the dead end, his brain began creating bridges between dimensional physics, musical harmony theory, and childhood memories of origami paper folding. These bridges weren't random neural firing. They followed specific patterns that Dr. Foster recognized from her research into creative problem solving. Tom's mind was systematically connecting disparate information sources to construct alternative conceptual frameworks that bypassed the original impossibility constraints. Dr. Keth's crystalline form resonated with harmonic frequencies of amazement as they reviewed similar patterns from other human subjects. Maria Santos's brain scans showed neural pathway formation that connected quantum mechanics with biological growth patterns and aesthetic appreciation of natural landscapes. Her impossible solution had emerged from this unlikely cognitive synthesis. David Kim's scans revealed the most complex neural architecture they had observed. His response to the faster-than-light communication problem had involved simultaneous activation of brain regions responsible for language processing, mathematical analysis, philosophical reasoning, and sensory perception. His critique of the problem's assumptions had emerged from cognitive integration that no other galactic species demonstrated. Dr. Foster explained the pattern to Dr. Keth using terminology that shocked the galactic scientific community. Human brains had evolved unique neural plasticity that allowed them to restructure their cognitive frameworks when faced with impossible problems. Instead of treating impossibility as absolute constraint, human minds automatically began searching for alternative conceptual approaches. This neural flexibility had developed through millions of years of evolutionary pressure that other galactic species had never experienced. Earth's chaotic development had subjected human ancestors to survival challenges that required transcending apparent impossibilities on a regular basis. Escaping predators they couldn't outrun, surviving in environments they weren't adapted for, Creating tools from materials that shouldn't work according to conventional physics, human brains had evolved to treat impossibility as a design challenge rather than a final answer. When conventional solutions failed, their neural architecture automatically began exploring unconventional alternatives. This wasn't conscious decision-making, it was fundamental cognitive programming that operated below awareness levels. Dr. Keth compared these findings with neural scan data from other galactic species, revealing the profound difference in cognitive architecture. Coran brains showed exceptional precision in mathematical processing but terminated cleanly when encountering impossible scenarios. Terminus cybernetic systems demonstrated perfect logical consistency while completely lacking flexibility when faced with contradictory information. The Nebulan electromagnetic consciousness patterns revealed sophisticated analytical capabilities, but showed no capacity for reconstructing their fundamental assumptions about reality. The gaseous beings could process information with incredible speed and accuracy, but they couldn't question the conceptual frameworks that organized that information. Every galactic species had evolved cognitive excellence within specific domains, but none had developed the cognitive flexibility that allowed humans to restructure their understanding of reality itself. This flexibility came at costs that other species had avoided through more specialized evolutionary paths. Humans were less efficient than Corans at mathematical processing, less logically consistent than terminus systems, and less analytically sophisticated than Nebulans, but humans possessed cognitive adaptability that made them capable of transcending limitations that constrained other species absolutely. When faced with problems that required reconceptualizing reality's basic assumptions, human brains began that reconceptualization automatically. Dr. Foster's research revealed that this process happened at subconscious levels, through rapid neural pathway reformation. Humans didn't consciously decide to question impossibilities. Their brains simply couldn't accept impossibility as permanent constraint. Neural architecture that had evolved for survival in chaotic environments continued operating according to the principle that any limitation could potentially be circumvented through sufficient creativity. The implications staggered the galactic scientific community. The universal cognitive assessment hadn't measured intelligence as previously understood. It had revealed fundamental differences in cognitive architecture that made certain species capable of transcending limitations that constrained others. Absolutely. Ambassador Quinn of the Zephyrians demanded experimental proof that human cognitive flexibility could consistently produce practical results rather than creative speculation. The gaseous being's form shifted to skeptical purple hues as he challenged Dr. Foster to demonstrate measurable outcomes from human impossibility-transcendence. Dr. Keth proposed a controlled experiment that would settle the question definitively. They would present human students with the galaxy's most enduring unsolved problems, theoretical challenges that had defeated the combined intellectual efforts of all member species for centuries or millennia. 12 problems were selected, each representing impossibilities that had shaped galactic development by defining absolute limits of what advanced civilizations could achieve. Faster than light travel without exotic matter, consciousness transfer between biological and artificial substrates, energy generation through pure information manipulation, and 9 other challenges that had been proven theoretically impossible. Through multiple independent analyses, the Galactic Education Council agreed to the demonstration, expecting to finally prove that human problem-solving was elaborate, creative fiction rather than genuine breakthrough thinking. Representatives from every major civilization would observe as human. Students attempted to solve problems that had stumped their greatest minds. Professor Williams assembled a team of 12 students, including all the original assessment participants, plus additional volunteers who had demonstrated similar cognitive patterns. They would work together rather than individually, allowing their unconventional thinking approaches to combine and amplify. The demonstration would take place aboard the Council flagship, with full monitoring of both the problem-solving process and the practical feasibility of any proposed solutions. Dr. Keth would provide real-time neural monitoring to verify that human cognitive flexibility operated as Dr. Foster's research indicated. As preparations began, reports continued arriving from human colonies where impossible solutions were being implemented with increasing success. Alex Rivera's atmospheric processors were terraforming Mars ahead of all projections. Nina Patel's quantum organisms were revolutionizing xenobiology research. Luke Morgan's temporal logistics systems were spreading throughout the mining industry. The pattern was clear and accelerating. Humans weren't just solving individual impossible problems. They were developing systematic approaches to impossibility transcendence that could be applied across multiple domains. Their cognitive flexibility was becoming a reproducible methodology rather than isolated breakthrough thinking. The galaxy waited to see whether humanity's claim to transcend impossibility would survive rigorous testing under controlled conditions, or whether their solutions would prove to be clever illusions that collapsed under scientific scrutiny. The demonstration would determine if cognitive flexibility truly could reshape reality's boundaries, or if impossibility remained absolute regardless of creative thinking approaches. Dr. Foster reviewed her neural mapping data one final time, confident that human brains possessed capabilities that other species lacked. The question was whether those capabilities could consistently produce practical impossibility transcendence or merely generate convincing theoretical frameworks that had no real-world application. The answer would reshape galactic civilizations, understanding of consciousness, intelligence, and the fundamental nature of reality itself. The Council flagship's primary conference chamber had been transformed into the most sophisticated testing environment in galactic history. Representatives from every major civilization clustered around holographic displays that would monitor both the problem-solving process and the practical feasibility of any proposed solutions. The atmosphere hummed with tension as species that had never agreed on anything united in their skepticism toward human claims of impossibility transcendence. 12. Human students sat at a curved table in the chamber center, completely unaware that their cognitive processes were being monitored by instruments capable of tracking individual neural pathway formations. Dr. Keth's crystalline form resonated with anticipation frequencies as his monitoring equipment prepared to record the most significant intelligence experiment in galactic history. The problems appeared on display screens around the chamber, each one representing centuries or millennia of failed attempts by the galaxy's greatest minds. The Omega problem dominated the central display, a theoretical challenge involving stable wormhole creation that 17 different species had proven impossible over 2,000 years of analysis. Tom Bradley studied the wormhole mathematics with the same casual confidence he had shown during the original assessment. The problem required energy levels equivalent to stellar output while maintaining spatial stability that defied known physics principles. Every previous attempt had concluded that stable wormholes were fundamentally incompatible with the structure of space-time itself. Tom began sketching alternative approaches in his interface margins, completely ignoring the established proof of impossibility. His neural patterns showed the same pathway reformation that Dr. Foster had documented, with his brain automatically connecting wormhole theory to completely unrelated knowledge domains. Maria Santos focused on the consciousness transfer problem that had stumped galactic philosophers and technologists for centuries. The challenge involved moving awareness between biological and artificial substrates without losing continuity of identity. Previous research had concluded that consciousness was so intimately connected to its original substrate that transfer was theoretically impossible. Maria approached the problem by questioning why consciousness needed to be transferred at all. Her framework treated awareness as a pattern that could be duplicated rather than moved, eliminating the continuity problem by accepting that consciousness could exist in multiple instances simultaneously. David Kim tackled the energy generation challenge that required creating useful power through pure information manipulation without violating conservation laws. His approach ignored the conservation constraints entirely, proposing that information itself was a form of energy that existed Outside conventional physics limitations, the human team worked with fluid collaboration that amazed their observers. Instead of competing for individual recognition, they shared insights and built upon each other's unconventional approaches. Luke Morgan's temporal mechanics expertise enhanced Nina Patel's biological understanding, while Alex Rivera's systems thinking connected seemingly unrelated solutions. Within 3 hours, they had developed theoretical frameworks for 7 of the 12 impossible problems. More importantly, their solutions weren't abstract mathematical speculation. Each framework included detailed implementation strategies that other species could theoretically follow using existing galactic technology. The breakthrough that silenced all skeptical observers came when the team addressed the Omega problem as a collective challenge. Tom Bradley's wormhole research had suggested that stability problems existed because previous attempts had tried to create wormholes in normal spacetime. The human team began exploring alternatives that eliminated this constraint entirely. Their solution involved creating wormholes in constructed dimensional pockets that existed parallel to conventional spacetime. These pocket dimensions could be engineered with customized physics laws that made wormhole stability natural rather than forced. Access would occur through quantum probability, matrices that allowed matter and energy to shift between normal space and the engineered pocket dimensions. The mathematics were elegant in their simplicity, treating dimensional engineering as construction work rather than physics violation. The energy requirements were manageable because the system worked with natural forces instead of fighting against fundamental laws. Implementation was theoretically achievable using modified versions of existing galactic technology. Dr. Keth's monitoring equipment confirmed that the human students were demonstrating the neural pathway reformation that Dr. Foster had documented. Their brains were systematically restructuring their understanding of reality to eliminate the conceptual frameworks that made problems impossible. Ambassador Quinn's gaseous form shifted through multiple color spectrums before settling on pale silver hues that indicated profound confusion. The Zephyrian representative had expected to witness creative speculation, not systematic impossibility transcendence that produced practical implementation strategies. The Terminus delegate's cybernetic systems repeatedly analyzed the human solutions, searching for logical errors that would prove their impossibility. Instead, the artificial intelligence found mathematical frameworks that were internally consistent despite being based on principles that didn't exist in galactic scientific literature. The Corin representative attempted to verify the human mathematics using traditional analytical approaches, only to discover that their precision-based cognitive architecture couldn't process the flexible conceptual frameworks that human solutions required. The reptilian beings could identify no computational errors, yet they couldn't understand how the solutions could work. Professor Williams watched with quiet pride as his students continued solving problems that had defined the absolute limits of galactic achievement for centuries. They approached each challenge with the same methodology that had emerged during the original assessment, treating impossibility as incomplete problem definition rather than absolute constraint. The 9th solution addressed faster-than-light travel without exotic matter by treating spacetime as a medium that could be convinced to cooperate rather than forced to comply. The 10th solution resolved consciousness backup problems by creating quantum awareness seeds that could grow into full consciousness when provided with appropriate substrate environments. By the demonstration's conclusion, the human team had provided theoretical frameworks for 11 of the 12 impossible problems. Their final challenge involved creating matter from pure energy without violating conservation laws, which they solved by proposing that conservation applied to closed systems while reality itself might be an open system with external energy sources. The assembled galactic representatives faced an unprecedented situation. Humans had systematically transcended limitations that had constrained galactic development for millennia, providing practical solutions to problems that defined the boundaries of what advanced civilizations could achieve. Dr. Keth's analysis confirmed that human cognitive flexibility operated exactly as Dr. Foster's research had indicated. Their brains possessed neural architecture that allowed them to restructure their understanding of reality when faced with impossible problems, treating conceptual limitations as temporary obstacles rather than permanent constraints. The implications rippled through galactic consciousness as representatives realized that thousands of years of scientific progress had been limited by species-specific cognitive boundaries rather than actual physical laws. Problems that had shaped the development of galactic civilization might simply require cognitive approaches that no species had developed until humanity joined the community. Ambassador Quinn formally requested that the Galactic Education Council revise their understanding of intelligence, consciousness, and the nature of impossibility itself. The gaseous being's form glowed with frequencies that indicated profound respect as he acknowledged that humans possessed cognitive capabilities that transcended established galactic understanding. The Galactic Education Consortium faced a fundamental choice. They could maintain their existing educational frameworks based on species-specific cognitive limitations, accepting that human achievements were isolated anomalies that couldn't be replicated by other species. Or they could embrace the human approach of treating impossibility as the starting point for innovation rather than its conclusion, revolutionizing galactic education to focus on cognitive flexibility rather than specialized expertise within established limitations. As the Council debated, human students across the galaxy continued applying their impossibility transcendence methodology to problems both theoretical and practical. A classroom test that had initially confused alien educators was now recognized as the revelation of humanity's greatest gift to galactic civilization. Humans had evolved cognitive architecture that treated reality as malleable rather than fixed, allowing them to reshape the boundaries of what minds could achieve. When they refused to accept that some things simply couldn't be done, their approach to impossibility had unlocked capabilities that other species possessed, but had never accessed due to cognitive constraints that humans naturally transcended. The galaxy would never be the same, as humanity's casual dismissal of impossibility became the foundation for a new era of unlimited achievement that redefined what advanced civilizations could accomplish when they stopped accepting limitations as absolute and started treating them as invitations for creative transcendence.